In a forsaken land where shadows stretched longer than the trees, a chilling stillness enveloped the night. The air felt thick and heavy, like a thick blanket laid over everything, making it hard to breathe. A flickering lantern dangled on a splintered post at the edge of a narrow path, illuminating the surrounding dark with a peculiar glow. The lantern's light danced and flickered, casting a warm, golden hue on the worn cobblestones beneath their feet. This narrow path, often ignored and overgrown with weeds, led travelers to a distant town beyond the old forest. But for tonight, it was a path shrouded in mystery and unease. As the cool night air brushed against their cheeks, travelers hurried along this path, their hearts racing with unease. Eyes darted nervously to every rustle that disrupted the eerie silence and every low sigh of the wind that whispered through the trees. Amongst these hapless souls was a group of 3 friends, Clara, Jacob, and Eliza. They had set off from their village, brave and excited, to visit the fabled market in a town many miles away, unaware of the ominous fate that awaited them. Clara, the brightest of the trio, had a way of making everything seem light and fun. With her flowing golden hair bouncing as she walked and her laughter ringing out, she seemed to defy the darkness that surrounded them. Her voice echoed cheerfully against the crooked trees. "What's the worst that could happen?" she had said, her bravado creating a bubble of hope despite the oppressive gloom. But as the words hung in the chilly air, a rustling from the nearby bushes made them stop, fear washing over their faces like a frigid tide. Had it been a mere animal or something more sinister? Clara's smile faltered as apprehension took root in her heart. The trio huddled closer together, their laughter fading like the last light of day. Beneath their laughter, a sense of trepidation seemed to hide, creeping slowly into their minds. Jacob, the most perceptive of the trio, felt an uneasy shiver ripple down his spine, as though eyes were watching them from the darkness. He peered through the trees, trying to shake off the discomfort. The branches swayed gently, whispering secrets he could not understand. "There's something not right about this place," he murmured, crossing his arms tightly, as if that would guard against the invisible force they sensed drawing nearer. Eliza, with her dark curls and wide brown eyes, glanced nervously at Jacob. "Maybe we should just hurry," she suggested, her voice shaking a little. The fear that clutched their hearts was thick and palpable, like fog rolling in to smother their hopes. They picked up their pace, the lantern swinging wildly beside them, casting grotesque shapes that danced and flickered like mischievous shadows against the trees. With each hurried step they took, the air around them became heavier, pregnant with an unspoken dread. It was as though the very earth was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As the narrow road twisted and turned ahead, Jacob's keen eyes spotted a clearing. Perhaps they might find respite there, a sense of safety for just a moment. "Maybe we can rest for a while," he proposed, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. They all agreed and hurried out of the woods, stepping into a chill that seemed to rise from the ground itself. In the center of the clearing lay remnants of a battlefield, the kind of place many stories warned about. Scattered bones half buried in the earth crumbled beneath the weight of time, their white color sickly against the dark soil. Clara gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "What happened here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The shadow of the clearing seemed to thicken as if answering her question. As if in response to Clara's query, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the bones and sending a shiver down their spines. It chilled them to the very core, and they huddled closer together, anxiety swelling like a dark wave. The remnants of lives lost whispered stories they could not hear, tales of valor and sorrow woven into the very air where they stood. What terror had unfolded here, under the blanket of stars that now blinked down at them, cradling secrets untold? Suddenly, a sharp crack reverberated through the clearing, drawing their attention like a magnet. The noise came from deeper into the encroaching night, accompanied by a guttural sound that sent chills racing down their backs. Jacob's heart raced faster. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly as goosebumps lined his arms. "We should leave, now." Yet, as they turned to leave, something rooted them to the ground. A creeping dread mingling with curiosity held their feet in place. Then, the atmosphere shifted again, and it felt like something monumental was unfolding right before their eyes. A colossal shadow drifted over them, blocking out the scant moonlight above. It was grotesque, an outline formed from jagged bone and dark mist that rose and fell with every pulse, towering over them like an ancient storm. The bone giant had awakened. Its hollow eye sockets glinted ominously with a malevolent hunger that reflected the lantern's feeble glow, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to halt as terror washed over them in waves. What kind of creature was this? With a thunderous, skeletal rattle, the bone giant lifted a massive arm composed of warped and jagged bones. It was unsettling to see something so unnatural move with such purpose. The sheer size of its form sent their hearts pounding in their chests, like mad drums calling out for survival. The essence of the battlefield echoed in its structure, a reminder of those who had perished in misery and despair. As it stretched over the clearing, dark energy pulsed from its core, putting fire in their veins and locking them in place. They stood paralyzed, hearts racing, with fear pooling in their stomachs. Savoring their fear, the bone giant opened its maw, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained with the echoes of past horrors, a terrifying sight that made them feel small and powerless. It was as if time itself had warped, and now, they stood on the edge of something unimaginable. The bone giant seemed to feast off their trepidation, reveling in the terror it inspired. In that haunting moment, Clara could hardly breathe, a lump forming in her throat as dread settled deep in her chest. "What do we do?" Eliza gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Jacob, catching his breath, felt a spark of bravery ignite inside him. "We run," he declared, suddenly finding his voice. "We have to get out of here." With that, the friends turned, their legs almost moving of their own accord as they sprinted back through the frenzied shadows of the clearing. The lantern swung wildly as they dashed through the night, illuminating their path, an uncertain beacon in the vastness of darkness. Every ounce of fear drove them to run faster than they'd ever thought possible, their breath coming out in sharp pants, their hearts racing like drumbeats in a frantic song. The bone giant let out a roar that shook the very ground, a cacophony that echoed through the trees like rolling thunder, making the very air vibrate around them. The friends knew it could easily catch up to them, and that fueled their desperation. In this direction, Clara screamed, leaping over a fallen branch that lay across their path. "Just keep going," her voice rang out, a rallying cry against the terror that pursued them. Eliza followed closely, her heart pounding loud in her ears. As they sprinted back into the maze of trees, shadows danced mockingly in the branches overhead. The night had transformed into a surreal blend of panic and resolve, as reality and fear melded together in a chaotic rush. They needed to escape. The thought of the giant closing the distance was enough to keep their legs moving. With eyes wide, Jacob led them through the dark corridors of the woods, searching for another path to break free from the creeping shadow behind them. "If we can just make it back to the village," he urged, gripping the lantern's handle tightly. "We can't let it catch us." Right then, the forest seemed to close in around them, thick and oppressive. But with each stride, they drew closer to freedom, pushing their fear aside, together. As they fled into the night, they couldn't help but wonder, what more lay ahead? Would they be able to escape the bone giant's grasp? The woods may have swallowed many in its depths, but with courage woven into their hearts, they would not be taken without a fight. They had to believe they could outrun the darkness. The presence of the bone giant loomed heavy in the air as it towered over Clara, Jacob, and Eliza. The chilling air around them was thick with dread, making it feel as though they were wading through a murky swamp. The moonlight struggled to penetrate the thick, looming shadows cast by the trees, and their flickering lantern provided only a slender beam of weak light, barely reaching beyond their shivering bodies. They felt the creeping chill crawl beneath their skins, and an icy finger traced along Clara's spine as she took in the sight of the monstrous creature. With its grotesque features illuminated for a fleeting moment, the bone giant looked like a terrible nightmare made flesh, crafted from the very bones of those who had encountered it before. Its eyes, dark pits of hunger, pierced through the dimness, boring into their frightened souls. Clara's heart pounded like a drum in her chest, each beat echoing a warning of impending doom. Memories of the stories they had laughed off as old wives' tales flooded her mind, tales told around flickering fires when bedtime stories turned into fearful whispers. Those stories now felt too real, and her heart sank as she realized they had been true all along. Clara broke the silence with a desperate cry, "We need to run." Her voice rang out like a bell, clearing the fog of fear for just a moment. She felt a surge of adrenaline, but her feet felt rooted to the earth, weighed down by dread. Her legs felt like lead, refusing to obey her frantic thoughts to flee. Jacob, understanding her plight, reached out and grabbed Clara's arm with a firm grasp, shaking her gently yet urgently. "Come on, Clara," he urged. "We cannot stay here." Eliza, caught in their panic, took a deep breath and nodded. Together, like a tightly woven fabric of sheer terror, they turned and raced back toward the dark embrace of the trees. As they ran, the shadow of the bone giant loomed over them, its movements fluid and powerful, each step it took sending vibrations through the ground that resonated deep in their bones. The sound of its bone-crunching roar echoed behind them, a cacophony that seemed to shake the very leaves from the branches above. Fear propelled them deeper into the woods, where the trees twisted into grotesque shapes, making the familiar landscape feel foreign and hostile. These were not the comforting woods they explored during sunny days. Now, they felt alive, waiting, watching, as if the very roots twisted in anticipation of what terror would unfold next. Clara could feel the branches reaching out, clawing and grasping as they flitted by, whispering secrets she dared not understand. In the flurry of their heightened terror, reality warped and shifted. The flickering lantern's flame danced uncertainly, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers toward the friends. Jacob turned back for just a moment, seeking a glimpse of the pursuing monster, his heart sinking further when he saw the towering silhouette pushing through the trees effortlessly, like a shadow chasing light. It was relentless. Suddenly, in the chaos of their escape, Eliza stumbled. A thick root, looking like a gnarled arm, snagged her ankle, sending her tumbling to the ground. The lantern clattered away, its light extinguished, plunging them into darkness so deep it felt suffocating. Clara's stomach knotted painfully. Panic gripped them all as they turned towards Eliza, horror painting their faces. Time seemed to slow down as Clara extended her hand to help her friend. "Get up, Eliza, we have to move," shouted Jacob, his voice breaking the tension, but just then, the creature roared again, its bone-chilling sound enveloping them like a shroud. It sent ripples of dread across the ground, and Clara felt as though she could hardly breathe. With every ounce of determination, they reached for Eliza, but the forest responded with the eerie laughter of unseen entities. It felt like the very shadows enjoyed their suffering. Whispers of long-lost souls echoed through the thick trunks of the trees, carrying tales of regret and despair. The memories of those who had ventured far from safety and were now trapped within the grip of the woods hung heavily in the air, each story wrapping around the friends like a fog, dampening their hope. Desperation surged through Clara as she grabbed Eliza's hand, pulling her up. The whispers twisted around her ears, warm and inviting yet sinister. Jacob urged them both forward, spotting a faint, peculiar glow through the dense cluster of trees. "This way," he screamed, believing this light might lead them to safety. The hint of light glimmered like a beacon amidst the terrible darkness, urging them on. They ran frantically toward the light, hope igniting within them. But as they broke through the last line of trees, the scene before them shattered their hopes. The clearing was wide and open but filled with ancient banners that were tattered and torn, remnants of battles long past. The banners fluttered eerily in the light breeze, their colors faded, telling tales of forgotten times. And strewn among them were skulls, glistening like pale moons in the moonlight, adorned with creeping flowers growing from their jagged edges as though the earth sought to reclaim what had been lost. Clara felt sick at the sight, her stomach turning in apprehension. She could almost hear the echoes of victory and despair that lingered in the air, muffled by the weight of the darkness surrounding them. That moment was shattered by blood-curdling screeches from the shadows that stretched out behind them. They turned, fearing what new horror awaited them, and saw gnarled limbs and rotting flesh emerging from the ground, rising like tortured souls, twisted and broken. The unmistakable energy of dread hung in the air around them, a grotesque reminder of those who had not escaped the grips of despair. Jacob's eyes widened in terror. "Keep running," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency and fear. With gritted teeth, they dashed forward, their hearts pounding against their ribs, determined to escape the clutches of the creeping horror that seemed to gain on them with every passing moment. The bone giant's roar spiraled through the air, mixing with the haunting whispers of the spirits rising from the ground, enveloping them in a terrifying soundscape. This cacophony of despair was a haunting reminder of the souls lost to the land. The throbbing fear weighed heavily upon Clara. The forest felt alive, responsive to their fear. Every breath they took seemed to energize the creatures and shadows lurking in the darkness. It was as if the ancient woods were feeding off their terror, their desperation painting an even darker portrait of despair. The whispers grew louder, taunting them, wrapping around them like a net closing in. Through the chaos, they spotted a jagged path leading further into the forest. It wound deeper into the trees like a serpent, surrounded by choking thorns and uprooted trees. The trio pressed on, feeling the sharp edges scrape against their skin as they moved hastily through the tortuous terrain. The ghostly images of the souls that had been lost seemed to close in around them, shadows flickering in the corners of their vision, but Clara focused fiercely on the path ahead. A sense of urgency spurred them onward, even as the bone giant's breath echoed closer, each guttural chuckle teasing their sanity. Breathless and terrified, they stumbled, their bodies protesting against the unforgiving nature of the wilderness. Yet somehow, the pale light of the moon above guided them, casting a gentle glow amid the darkness as if trying to offer them hope, a brief moment of clarity. But questions flooded their minds, drowning out any glimmer of hope. How could one escape a creature birthed from pure despair? The bone giant represented their deepest fears, the loss, the hunger, the desperate darkness of the void. As they surged deeper into the woods, Clara felt hope slip through her fingers like grains of sand, dwindling, fading like the flickering flame of a candle threatened by a cold wind. The chilling realization slackened their strides. They were trapped in a place where darkness ruled. With every heartbeat, they could hear the forest responding, whispering tales of those who had come before them. Each of those tales felt heavy with sorrow and regret, a warning carved into the very essence of the woods. The night unfolded like a ravenous beast, its stomach growling for the unsuspecting souls it had trapped within its cold embrace. The air thickened with the stench of decay and despair as Clara, Jacob, and Eliza pressed onward, fighting against a heavy weight that clung to their hearts. Eliza's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation a struggle against the oppressive darkness surrounding them. The horrors of the night clung to them like shrouded ghosts, and every strange noise and rustle of leaves tightened the noose of fear around their spirits. As they moved deeper into the forest, strange sights began to emerge in the dim light. Shadows danced jeeringly among the gnarled roots of ancient trees, warped figures flitting just beyond the corner of their vision. Clara squinted into the darkness, trying to decipher the shapes that lurked there. When the wind howled through the branches, it felt like the trees themselves were whispering secrets, their long, twisted limbs reaching out as if to ensnare them. The echoes of distant, demoniac laughter taunted them, a cacophony of lost souls whispering haunting tales of those who had wandered into this cursed place before. Clara's foot caught on an exposed root, sending her sprawling to the ground. She felt the cool dirt against her cheek, its dampness soaking through her clothes. As a wave of panic flooded her senses, she blinked away tears and pushed herself up. "Get up," Jacob urged, reaching down to help her. His hand grasped hers firmly, pulling her back to her feet. Once Clara righted herself, she scanned their surroundings, dread pooling in her stomach. They were truly alone, trapped within an eternal, unholy night. As they resumed their journey, Clara noticed a glimmer hiding beneath a tangled mass of vines. Curiosity nagged at her to investigate, like a tiny spark of hope amidst the shadows. It seemed to shimmer enticingly, beckoning her closer. But as she took a cautious step forward, a chill swept through her, sending shivers down her spine and whispering warnings to her heart. She hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Eliza, clutching Jacob's arm tightly, pulled him away from the vines. "We can't waste time, Clara. We need to keep moving. Please." Her voice was trembling, sounding remarkably small against the expansive dark surrounding them. Jacob nodded, anxiety etched on his face. The bone giant's presence weighed like an enormous boulder in the air, growing ever closer and heavier. The trio stumbled forward, fear overshadowing Clara's intrigue as fragmented memories of the tales her grandmother had told her flickered through her mind. "Clara, do you remember the stories about the bone giant?" Jacob whispered, breaking the ominous silence as they walked. Clara nodded slightly, remembering the way her grandmother's voice would quiver with fear when she spoke of it. It was a creature of nightmare, built from the souls claimed by famine and war, endlessly roaming to feed its ravenous hunger. But why had it set its sights on them? Clara's heart raced with chilling uncertainty. Was there something about them that summoned its malevolence? What horror awaited them now? Listen, Jacob whispered again as they shuffled through the dark, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. The wind carried an eerie song around them, filled with grief and yearning, encompassing their every thought. It was almost as if the forest itself was mourning, a subterranean melody creating a symphony of terror in the night, lamenting the agony of lost souls trapped in a cycle of despair. The friends felt their resolve waver, the very essence of life draining from them, turning their breaths shallow as dread gnawed relentlessly at their sense of reality. Suddenly, Clara spotted flickering lights ahead. Look, there, it must lead to safety. Her voice trembled. A sliver of hope had crept into her heart. But only a hint of confidence remained, dangling precariously above the tight knot of fear coursing through their veins. As they approached, the lights danced maddeningly, drawing them towards an old, decrepit ruin swallowed by nature's clutches. It was an ancient mausoleum, half hidden by the thick foliage and creeping vines, its entrance gaping like a ravenous maw longing to consume them whole. With no other option, they stepped inside, and the air turned stale, filled with the putrid scent of age and decay. A shiver ran down Clara's spine as she took a cautious step forward, the eerie quiet filling her ears like a whisper. Cobwebs hung thickly from the ceiling like the fingers of lost souls reaching out to embrace the living. The trio felt a weight in the air, a creeping unease as their instincts screamed for them to turn back. Yet dimly lit by flickering torches, the ruins beckoned them with the allure of forgotten history, eager for the company of the living. Eliza clutched Clara's hand tightly, her skin cold against the touch. "This place feels wrong," she murmured, barely above a whisper. It was then they heard it, a deep, guttural laughter resonating from within the walls, as if the mausoleum itself were laughing at their fear. The bone giant had caught up, its ominous presence lurked just outside, eager to feast on their apprehension. Panic surged anew, driving them deeper into the mausoleum, but each heartbeat echoed the bone giant's growing approach. The shadows danced as if taunting them, twisting between the fragile beams of dim light. The sanctuary of the ruin became increasingly horrifying. Clara tried to steady her breathing, though the anxiety felt like a dragon clawing at her insides. Fractured tombstones littered the ground, many cracked and broken, names carved deep into their surfaces, names that had long since faded into oblivion. Clara's imagination sparked with ideas of who these souls were. Travelers, maybe, who had wandered too far, lost family members, or even those who had fallen to the curse of the bone giant. She shuddered at the thought. Their whispers mingled with the bone giant's laughter, rising to a crescendo that rattled her core. A wave of despair washed over them as the reality set in. There was no way out. They were trapped, ensnared in a moment steeped in terror. The air vibrated with a dark energy that pressed against their chests, each moment stretching into what felt like an eternity. Clara gripped Eliza's hand tighter, trying to lend warmth and comfort. Suddenly, to Clara's utter horror, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air grew thick, pulsating with a sinister energy, as the shadows around them began to writhe and shift, twisting into ghoulish shapes. The bone giant's massive form pressed against the entrance, filling the doorway like impending doom. Clara turned, fear clawing at her heart like a wild animal desperate to escape. "We have to hide," Jacob shouted, his voice rising above the cacophony of chaos. The urgency in his tone pierced through their fear. They fumbled into a nearby alcove, squeezing themselves into the tight space. Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of her friends beside her. As darkness enveloped them, their breaths seemed to synchronize into a rhythm of survival, shallow and rapid. They crouched together, huddled against the stone wall, hearts pounding like the drums of an army charging into battle. The bone giant's laughter vibrated through the walls, a thunderous echo that reverberated in the very marrow of their bones, a sound so deep and powerful that it felt like it might shake the walls down upon them. Clara closed her eyes tight, picturing the light of day, imagining the sun spilling down on her face, warming her skin. "Shush," Eliza hissed softly, clamping a hand over her mouth. The three friends could hear the enormous, lumbering steps of the bone giant drawing closer, each thud resonating like the toll of a clock counting down to a final fate. Clara felt a mix of fear and frustration flickering within her. What could they possibly do against something so powerful? "It can't find us," Jacob whispered, his voice tight. His eyes darted around, scanning for any sign of movement in the dark. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the place was alive with unfathomable secrets. It was as if the very stones of the mausoleum were watching them, judging them for their decision to enter this dreadful place. The laughter outside intensified, a cruel taunting sound, as it echoed through the air, snaking into the alcove like a dark fog. Clara pressed her palms against her ears, trying to block it out, but the sound burrowed deep into her consciousness, spiraling her thoughts into nothingness. "Stay quiet," she urged her friends, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay still." They crouched, hoping that the darkness would cloak them safely so the bone giant would pass them by. Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a relentless drumbeat in the oppressive silence. Minutes felt like hours as they remained frozen in their hiding spot. The laughter began to fade, replaced by a low growl, echoing through the mausoleum. The friends held their breath, their bodies trembling with uncertainty. Just when Clara thought the worst was over, a loud crash erupted at the entrance, startling them into silence. It sounded like the bone giant had slammed into something, a door, perhaps, or the very walls of the mausoleum. "Do you think it found us?" Eliza's voice quavered as the three friends exchanged fearful glances. They couldn't see anything in the dark, but they had a sense that danger was lurking nearby, watching and waiting. Clara wished for courage, for strength, but all she felt was the cold grip of despair enfolding her, shaking her confidence. Yet within that darkness, a spark ignited. Clara remembered her grandmother's stories, the ones that danced in her mind like elusive wisps of light in an otherwise dreary world. "We're not lost yet," she murmured, resolute. "If we work together, we can find a way out. We have to believe." "Believe?" Jacob echoed, uncertainty clouding his eyes. "What do we do? There's no way to fight it." Clara thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We can't fight it, but maybe we can outsmart it. We can find a way to escape." The flicker of hope momentarily lightened the gloom wrapped around them, and she squeezed Eliza's cold hand tighter. But deep inside, Clara felt the gnawing fear re-emerging. The bone giant had hunted so many before them, and with each heartbeat, it felt closer. "We just have to wait," she whispered, hoping her words would carry some semblance of strength into the shadows. And so they sat in silence, wrapped in darkness, shrouded by fear. The laughter and growls of the bone giant faded into the distance, allowing a fragile stillness to settle around them. Clara's heart pumped in time with every beat of hope, carrying them gently from fear and despair back to the faintest stirrings of courage. Eventually, the haunted corridors began to breathe with mystery, and Clara felt a tiny flicker of determination rising within her. They might be lost in this dark forest, chased by a creature born of nightmares, but they would find a way. Together, they would escape the clutches of the bone giant and find their way back to the light. With resolve hardening in her chest, Clara made a silent vow: she would protect her friends, no matter what. They would escape this place, and when they did, they would carry their stories with them. Stories of survival against all odds, of bravery in the face of despair. And as the shadows twisted and turned around them, the night still laying claim to its terrors, hope began to illuminate the darkness, guiding them forward into the unknown. The bone-chilling laughter echoed ominously through the woods, twisting and turning among the trees. It was a sound that sent shivers racing down Clara's spine, making her feel as if ice carried through her veins. The darkness around them was alive, whispering secrets that no one dared to speak. Clara, Jacob, and Eliza huddled together in the shadowy alcove of the ancient mausoleum, their hearts racing like war drums in their chests. The cold night air wrapped around them like a heavy blanket, suffocating their hopes and squeezing away their breaths, leaving only the stutters of soft gasps. The fear wrapped tightly around them, squeezing them until there was no room left for hope to breathe. Outside, the bone giant loomed, an enormous, terrifying shadow against the silver light of the moon, a silhouette so menacing that it looked like it could swallow the very night whole. Suddenly, the alcove creaked and groaned under the pressure of the nearby shadows, as if the stones and walls themselves were alive. Clara could almost believe they were made of a dark, breathing creature that desired nothing more than to pull them into its icy depths. She exchanged a glance with Jacob, and in that fleeting moment, their eyes spoke volumes. They mirrored each other's dread and desperation, emotions swirling between them like the winds storming outside. "Do you think it could come in here?" Eliza whispered, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf in the wind. The uncertainty in Clara's heart made her shake her head. Yet, beneath her confidence, doubt gnawed at her layers, stretching her fear tighter and tighter around her core, squeezing until it was hard to breathe. Then, for a moment, the laughter faded into nothingness, replaced by an unsettling silence that swallowed the air whole. It was too quiet, like the calm before a storm, and Clara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, uneasy and taut with anticipation. The heavy footsteps of the bone giant began again, a slow, deliberate crunching that sent vibrations through the air and into their very bones. "We need to find a way out," Jacob urged, urgency coloring his voice. "This isn't safe." His words struck a chord deep within Clara. In that dark moment, she knew instinctively he was right. They needed to escape the clutches of this terrifying creature, but where could they go? Fear propelled them from their hiding spot, urging their legs to move forward. They ventured deeper into the cold, damp mausoleum. Flickering torches cast uneven shadows along the stone walls, revealing grotesque carvings and figures that twisted in horrifying ways. The walls told tales of long-forgotten battles filled with blood and agony, each story a fierce echo of suffering. Those images seemed alive, as if they could leap off the stone and entrap the children within the horrors they depicted. Clara's instincts screamed that this place was no ordinary grave. It was somewhere even darker, a forgotten passageway into an eternity filled with hurt. "Look," Eliza exclaimed, pointing towards a crooked door at the far end of the room. Its outline glowed faintly, sparkling like an old friend beckoning them towards freedom. They scrambled toward it with all the energy they could muster, unaware of how the shadows moved just behind, trailing them like persistent worries. With each hurried step, the walls quaked, echoing their frantic breaths in a taunting way. The malicious laughter of the bone giant swelled, as if it were celebrating their fear, overwhelming their fragile hearts. As they reached the door, Jacob paused. Hesitant, he eyed the trembling floor beneath his feet. "What if it's a trap?" he asked, voice shaky as doubt clouded his mind. But Clara, driven by a spark of hope, was already reaching for the handle. The door creaked open with a heavy groan, revealing a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. They exchanged quick glances, hope battling against terror in their young hearts. As they stepped into the room, a chill like icy fingers snaked around them, making Clara shiver. The bone giant's laughter danced menacingly behind them, trailing into the unknown like a dreadful promise that they could never escape its terrifying grip. Just as the door flew shut around them, sealing their fate like a locked cage, the wind howled in fury. The sound was a terrible crescendo that seemed to mix their gasps with echoes of lost souls, trapped and groping for a light they could never find. They fell to their knees in the darkness, and the stones beneath them felt like shifting sands, an endless, hopeless pit of despair. And then, as if summoned from their deepest, darkest fears, the bone giant broke through the mausoleum's defenses, filling the chamber with its immense, abominable presence. Clara's heart seemed to freeze, solid and heavy in her chest as she beheld the monster before them. Its skeletal figure looming like the full weight of the night, and the glint of hunger in its empty eye sockets felt like a cruel mirror reflecting their panic and dread, an insatiable desire that made each of their hearts race even faster than before. Panic surged through Jacob, Eliza, and Clara like a wild storm. Their screams echoed through the chambers, bouncing off the stone walls, making them seem all the more trapped. It was in that terrible moment of clarity that they understood the harrowing truth. Once you were caught in the clutches of despair, there was no way to escape it. The shadows lurked ceaselessly, wrapping around their memories and emotions like a dark, suffocating blanket. The bone giant stepped forward, casting a monstrous shadow that swallowed the flickering light around them. Clara felt a sliver of hope dimming with every heartbeat as the creature drew nearer, reminding them that in this world of nightmares, fate could be sinister and cruel. In that chilling moment of connection, they realized they had wandered too far into a realm where light struggled to reach. The laughter of the bone giant filled the emptiness, an eternal reminder that hope could flutter briefly like a candle flame, but, more often than not, it would be snuffed out completely in the relentless storm of despair. And right then, they could feel their resolve weakening against the grim acceptance of their fate, overshadowed by the truth looming around them. This world was woven entirely of darkness, entangling them in threads colored by fear. Each twist and turn seemed to pull them deeper into the jaws of horror, leaving them to face an endless night along with the realization that they might never return to the bright, joyful days of their childhood. With every breath, as the bone giant edged closer, they could feel the chilling embrace of hopelessness wrap even tighter around them, making it seem impossible to move. The darkness was all-consuming, and Clara, Jacob, and Eliza knew they had to draw on every ounce of bravery to face their fate. But as each second ticked by, they felt their strength fading, overrun by the overwhelming sense that they were trapped within the jaws of a nightmare from which there was no escape, their last flickers of hope vanishing into the shadows.